Record button, so we are recording.
How do you know Tom McCallum? I've never met him in person. I've only heard of him via David, and we communicate a little bit on LinkedIn.
Tom and I have known each other for quite a long time now, and originally, I can't remember when we first met, but we connected through Entrepreneurial Scotland. It was the Entrepreneurial Exchange up here. You maybe remember that. Started out in about the 90s. And we're of a similar vintage and know a lot of the same people. And at a point in time, Tom, you might remember this, you might remember better than me, but at a point in time, we met and we connected, and we've met in real life a few times when we've been able to, and we've met virtually from time to time as well. We had a lovely lunch one day at the back of King's Cross Station before I took a train back up from London to Edinburgh a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, we've talked on a fairly regular basis.
Well, I knew Tom, of Tom, only because of Cayman. David, I think, had met him in Cayman Islands years ago.
Yeah.
Mark Holowesco, I think. Mark Holowesco was in.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Tom is telling he met David in Cayman in 2010. I think Garmin must have had a training camp or an event in Cayman.
Yeah. And Holowesco, I think, was.
They were a sponsor, weren't they?
Sponsor of the team, yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Avril, let's get this show on the road for today. Welcome to Powered by Positive. I think this is week 3 of our series. So good of you to join us, and for those of you that are that have joined us for today, welcome. This is also being recorded. I did remember to hit the record button, Andrew, so you'll be delighted to hear that. And this will appear on YouTube at a point in time in the not too distant future. But today I'm delighted to have Avril Miller with me here. So almost about to say in the studio, but of course we're not in a studio. Avril, you're in London. I'm in Perthshire today. And Avril and I met earlier this year and have had some fascinating conversations, and I thought it would be really interesting for us to jump on and in this third event, Empowered by Positive, and just share a bit of our experiences of lockdown. By way of an introduction, Avril has a wealth of experience in business. We've been a CEO in the financial services industry and wealth management, built a huge business in that arena. You now work as a non-exec, Avril, and you can maybe tell us a little bit more in a moment about the work that you do. And also work as a coach and mentor with executives, business owners, and individuals. Based down in London, and welcome, Avril. Tell us a little bit more.
Crikey, more. Well, I mean, I'm one of those. I'm one of those ones who've had that multiple career thing. I think it's what I love about today is that youngsters are now looking at their future and they're realizing they don't have to be single track anymore. And so I was an engineer, and then I taught maths and physics, and then I set up a wealth management business, and then I became a turnaround expert. And now I do, as you say, coaching and mentoring, and I still do business turnaround, but I try and do it through the CEOs now rather than getting in my sleeves rolled up quite so much. And I'm very sector neutral, which again is another of these great things, I think, for younger people coming through. And I notice now my conversation keeps coming back to young people, because this is where it's all about now. And you know, when someone asked me about mentoring the other day and who were my mentors, and I said, well, nearly all my mentors now were 20 years younger than me.
That's interesting.
They come with a different perspective on life and a different set of life experiences, and particularly around the technology space, but I do an awful lot of work in the technology space, and I know nothing about technology.
That's an interesting one. So you do, and I know that you do a lot of work around technology. What got you into that world?
Well, really what got me into the world was, first of all, you can't avoid technology in the growing of a business. So for instance, one business I worked in after because financial services, as you know, is Neanderthal. It has never really dragged its arse into the modern world. It's only just doing it now. And you at Ashton McGill are light years ahead with the way you use it in your business. But when I started working with Create Fertility, I had to get really involved with sort of administrative technology. So how do you aggregate information and send it to the HFEA, and how do you secure information about patients? And then I worked with Natterbox for a while, and that was about effective call management. again, using technology. And then I sort of bounced along through that a bit. And then about 6 or 7 years ago, I met a guy called Justin Megaborn, who I think you spoke to just yesterday or the day before.
What days back now?
Yeah, and Justin at that time was working with a company which was doing cryptography, really. I mean, he's a very deep technologist, really seriously clever stuff that I don't quite understand at all. And I was asked to go in and help because the founder had died, and the board was the board was dysfunctional before he died, but it was even more dysfunctional after he died. And they didn't quite know what they were building anymore. And I met Justin there. And since then, he is now, I think, 36 or something, he and I then realized that what we had was that great combination of very deep business understanding with a very deep technology understanding. And if you put the two together, you got the business of technology, because technology is rarely the business. It's the thing which delivers something. And so from then we've worked on all manner of things, medical programs, military. We do a lot of stuff with the military, and he's constantly fascinating me with the clever things that technology can do. And it's always about the business of technology, which is brilliant. Yeah.
And so that as you say, I had a call with him the other day, and one of his partners over in Czech. And I suppose that brings us to the world that we've lived in for the last 7 or 8 months, where people have worked remotely. They have been in different locations. How have you seen that? Let's call that lockdown 1, if you like, Avril. What's lockdown 1 been like for the people and the businesses that you work with?
Well, the thing about lockdown for me, and apart from a personal perspective, because the businesses I work with with a Russian business, so 50% of the business is in Russia, and there's another piece of it over in Cayman. I work with a Greek Cypriot and Russian business. So I'm incredibly used to being, straddling time zones. I work with a business which is based in Vancouver and another one in San Francisco. It has never struck me as odd that my days are spent talking to people who are remote all over the place. And I see my Russian colleagues usually every 6 weeks, but haven't seen them for a wee while yet. So in terms of how my day has gone, it's almost completely not changed, apart from the fact that I used to get the joy of going into either the Savile Row office or the Basinghall Street office for one of those businesses and actually seeing real people. I miss seeing real people. Yeah. But we were very lucky, and I think so many businesses were global before and hadn't realized that they were in the vanguard of what lockdown would mean, and that actually all they had to do was to kind of ratchet up a bit how they did what they do to make it truly effective. They tended to think that they were being disadvantaged by their global personality, whereas actually they've now realized that not only is that the norm, is that they can be light years ahead with how they do it.
I think that's been a big shift. And you and I were just talking before we started to record about London and the centre of London, which by all accounts is a bit of a ghost town just now.
Tragic, yeah.
And I will be curious to see how that plays out over time, as the reports yesterday were vaccine, and we could have a vaccine in the UK by Christmas time, which makes you think that there could be a shift back towards what we used to do and how we used to work.
I think the big challenge is that there are an enormous number of benefits from what has happened for those of us who are fortunate. I always have to counter that for an awful lot of people. There's been nothing but downsides. The one sort of economic and social shift has been that people have realized, and businesses have been forced to recognize, that it is possible for people to be effective working from home, part or all of the time. I've always had this opinion that managers who don't trust what their staff are doing when they're working from home can't be trusted when they themselves are working from home. It's a simple reflection of their own attitude, Yeah. And now businesses have lost that. That argument is never going to be able to be retrenched wholly.
Yeah.
What people will do, I think, is they will miss, as I miss, everything I do involves talking with people, and the more I can be in front of them, with them, the better. And I do think there is going to have to be a need to find some way of getting back to that. And if you try and structure it that, you know, every Thursday the sales team is in the office, that's not how creativity works. So there's some really interesting thinking that's going to have to take place around how does creativity work, because it happens in the spaces between things, not in the structured things.
It's really interesting. I chair an architect practice, architect business up in Aberdeen, and you know, there's a conversation we've been having in that business about what is the workplace of the future, what does it look like, how might it be used, and also thinking about, well, here we are, you and I both working from home today in our homes, and our homes were never designed for that. Our homes were designed to be homes with bedrooms, not studies. And so in that architecture field, there's a lot of thinking going on now, and well, what does the future home need to look like?
Yeah.
To recognize that people may work from home part of the week.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it took me, well, I spent the first lockdown up with my daughter, so it was different. When I came down here, it took me another 4 or 5 weeks to get around to investing in a decent chair. You know, I was perched on a dining chair for
yeah.
And when I finally built the damn thing, oh my heavens, that was a whole day. First thing was screwdrivers and Allen keys, but I finally built the damn thing, sat on it and thought, oh, it does make a difference. So yeah, I mean, light, space, direction. You know, I turned myself away from facing the wall because I felt like a rabbit in a hutch. And really, it's really interesting. But I think that for a lot of people, there are some real upsides. I mean, that the commute, that wasted time that we used to do every single day, that was for the vast, for some people, it was the transition time. It's when they shape shifted between being a mum getting the kids off to school or being a dad trying to get breakfast sorted out for everybody, and then suddenly having to turn into, you know, high powered something or other. And they did that in that transitional hour or whatever.
Yes.
And of course, I mean, I just spent that time with David in Spain and watching him trying to merge working from home with 3 small kids and 3 dogs, and I just thought, holy shit, I mean, that's all but impossible.
Yeah, because I guess previously he'd have been traveling, he'd have been on the race, wouldn't he?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or in a studio somewhere else doing it. And then of course other, you know, his other work outside of his commentating work. So, but I do think that tremendously wasted, particularly in London. You know, people coming in from Sussex and with the very poor southeast trains, spending, you know, nearly 2 hours getting in the morning and 2 hours getting back at night. That's your life being sucked out of you. That's not good.
No, and I think the danger with that, Avril, the danger in that world is the balance that people have to find to strike is not just to now spend those other 4 hours sat at your desk looking at Zoom and working all day long, just finding that balance.
Well, and you know, the things that get lost in that, you know, there are only so many areas of our lives at once. There's your work, there's your family life, there's your sporting or recreational life, there's your, you know, your downtime, your nothing. Something goes out the window, and every time something goes out the window, there's a piece missing from that part of what makes you whole. So I think it is a really good opportunity for those of us who are fortunate to be able to redress. How do we rebalance that? I worry a great deal about the fact that for so many people, we're talking about choices that they simply do not have. You know, they're in accommodation which doesn't lend itself to being trapped in all day. They're perhaps not being paid, or they're fearful of not being paid in the future. I don't think we've even begun to assess the damage that is going to happen to families and human beings.
And I think that you're right, and it's just one of the reasons that we created this series of events, and you know, that language of Powered by Positive about how can we, you know, what do we need to do, what do we need to think about, and how can we help in our own small way to shape a better future. And for you know, they're in a city like Dundee, which is just five miles up the road from where I'm sitting right now. So Scotland's 4th largest city. We have the highest rate of teenage pregnancy in Scotland. 25% of children in Dundee live below the poverty line.
Yeah.
Which is, in a modern society, it defies belief. But
it's heinous. I was watching Andrew Neil on something the other night, and he was talking actually to a Scottish politician, and they were talking about power and power. Where is power vested? And this is not anything to do with politics. And Andrew Neil was saying, well, this is about policy. It's not about power. The average male expectancy in Glasgow is less than in sub-Saharan Africa. I mean, how can we have this as an acceptable thing in any part of our society? And in parts of London, you walk with the homeless, where Remembrance Day is tomorrow. Mm. Some of those guys are on the street with nothing. I mean, I don't believe we are a divided society per se, but I think that we're a society where all of us walk around too much. We now have this expression, to be in our bubble. Mm. Too many of us have been in a bubble for far too long, and we need to get out of that, and we need to understand that you live. I had this conversation with a friend of mine, quite heated one, about a month or so, when I was resisting a bit some of the British English rules around what we do, and saying I didn't think they were based in practicality and common sense. And she says, but Avril, I don't know why you're bothering. We're in our little bubble here, and it doesn't really matter. And I said, you're not living in a bubble. Your child has to go to school. You have to walk to the supermarket. You have to engage with society. And we do not live in a bubble. And I think we really do have to get that out of our heads. We are connected.
I suppose the big question then is, how on earth do we do that? How on earth do we begin that process?
I've been struggling with this for some time, and I was thinking about it in relation to your powered by positivity and community. And of course, the big challenge is that for a lot of us, we don't live in a tangible community anymore. I wouldn't say that I live in a community much anymore. I have a very small circle of friends. I live in West Kensington in London. I have some community through my church. I go to the Church of Scotland down here when I'm allowed to go to church. But I think we have to start taking it as a personal crusade. I do think that we can do all sorts of things in groups and all sorts of things in communities, but I think that the most important things happen when you take it as a personal crusade, that you pay attention to things as you see them and you don't walk past.
Yeah.
That you contribute where you can. Marcus Rashford's campaign for fair share. If you're making money, if you're earning an income and you're not contributing, then I hope you're contributing to something else, because I mean, this is scandalous that we have children who are going hungry, and it doesn't matter why children are going hungry. It just matters that they're going hungry. Yeah. Don't worry about the root cause. The root cause is going to have to be dealt with, but deal with the problem today. And so I'm very much a big believer that we have to move back to a sense of personal contribution and personal responsibility. And I would like more people to not just feel angst about it, but to go out and do something as they are walking around. Do something. As you are in business, do something. If you're running a business and you've got small supplier businesses, change their flipping payment dates. Pay them on time. Pay them quicker than they're asking for. You can do so many things in business to make life easier for other people if you are surviving.
It's a really interesting observation. And it's a couple of things that you talked about, Avril. Community. And one of the things I've noticed up here in Perthshire, and possibly around further afield, but as people have shifted to working from home, then I've seen in some areas, not all areas, they tend to be the smaller villages. Smaller villages, smaller towns, starting to come together and supporting one another more. And we have a hotel here in the village, and it's one of the reasons we moved to this village, because it had a thriving hotel, which over the summer is normally would be super busy with weddings, That's where they've made their money. But you know, nice bar, nice restaurant, and on a Friday night we could walk along there. It's 500 meters. I've measured it on my bike. Takes no time to get there. And of course, with COVID, they've had to stop doing weddings.
Yeah.
Which you're looking at thinking, crikey, and how are they going to survive with that? And when they were able to reopen, what was lovely to see was the community starting to support them more than ever.
Yeah.
And as they've had to shift, and it has been shifting sands on a regular basis based upon the rules that we have here in Scotland, the community have supported them. And slowly but surely, people in a small village like this I know more people now than I did in March in this little village.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think that's where villages and you know, tangibly small, perhaps geographically enclosed communities find it so much easier to do this. You know people, you have a sense of empathy for people and for situations. In larger cities, it's extremely difficult. I mean, where I live in a very small street. There's about 10 of us who know each other very well, and we've been delivering food and looking after people and all of those sorts of things. But that's the tip of your own personal tiny iceberg. You know, we've got huge floating sheets of ice just scudding down the river just now, with people being carried out to sea. And I fear that much of what is going wrong just now is now being hidden. You know, so many of the homeless, of course, the homeless were taken off the streets. It's amazing it's taken this to get the homeless off the streets. I know it's not always as easy as that, but now they're back on. A lot of things are going on behind closed doors that previously, you know, could have come out into the open. And all people who are suffering from the, you know, the lack of healthcare and mental health care through all of this. And that's why I think it's everything that can be done from a group and a collective and a community basis should be done, needs to be done. And thank God that I think people around the world are generally good. I really do believe that people are good and that they will pull together. But when you don't have anyone to pull with or to be associated with, and you feel helpless, then the only thing you can do, and the best thing you can do, is to take that personal responsibility and say, I will stand up for, go and seek out, contribute to, pay attention to, because it's actually a way of feeling better about yourself too. It's an entirely selfish motive. You know, helping other people is entirely selfish. Makes us feel better about ourselves.
One of the first times we spoke, might even have been the first time we spoke, I had read a blog post you'd written back in May or June, I think, and it was about your experiences in that at the start of lockdown.
Yeah.
And you talked about meeting an old lady in the park. And there was something lovely about, there was something profoundly sad about this circumstance, but lovely that humanity of you sitting with her and just listening and talking.
Well, I met her again when I went back.
She was up in Cheshire.
Yes, it was up in Cheshire in Alderley Edge, and she sort of lurked a wee bit when I bumped into Francis's old personal trainer in the parks, who shouted, "Hi, Avril!" So I stood to have a chat, and then this lady kind of lurked nearby, and I assumed that she knew him, but I think she just spotted the white hair and thought, she'll do. And so we ended up chatting, and you know, her husband had died in August and they'd moved house, and she didn't have any family. And I managed to see her again, and I managed to get in touch with Age Concern, and also there's a community in East Cheshire. I got in touch with them, and I contacted her to say I'd done that because I was leaving the next week. And then when I went back up, I saw her in the park again, and she had a much better spring in her step. They'd been to see her, they'd had someone help her do her online banking, and that was community. You know, that was community that did that, which was lovely to see. But that's what I mean about the personal thing. The community, the help is there, but the bridge between bereft and helped is often just one person noticing and choosing to be engaged.
And that's that point you mentioned about stepping out of our bubble. And I think for so long, for me, I think there's been a real realization that over the past 30 years of working, I've just done what I did because that's what you always did. I used to commute when I lived in Aberdeen. I had some days my commute would be 2 hours from Inverurie, 25 miles. I could cycle my bike quicker to my office than I could drive a car. But that's just what we did, and we all sat in our cars and slowly went in, and you know, I think one of the things I've realized this summer is that there's a different way to live your life, and just because that's how we did it for 30 years and more before that isn't how we should in all sorts of aspects. Work, personal life, community. And you know, we talk about that often within our team at Ashton McGill about how we might live differently in future. And
and a lot of it has been down to power differences, hasn't it? You know, we did what we did because that was what management and corporate said we should do. There was a wonderful letter published just this last week that Joe Biden, as a senator, wrote to his staff, basically where he said, not only do I expect you to make sure that you attend your kids' plays and weddings and bat mitzvahs and parties and any of these other things, but if I hear you have ever missed anything like that because you feel you have a work commitment to me, then I will be deeply disappointed in you. And it was, I mean, that is the sort of thing we should be saying, because people can be, I genuinely believe people are good and people can be trusted. Trust them to do the right thing at the right time.
Tom's just for any of you watching in the chat, Tom has just shared Joe Biden's letter.
Here
in the chat bar.
Yeah.
There's just pick up on there's a comment in the chat bar as well, from a question perhaps from Steve Bonthorne. Steve has, so I'll just read the question. Do you think COVID has happened in order for us to look after each other more, especially those in our communities? Perhaps not happened, but is it that pivot, that shift that we all needed to make?
Well, there was a meme right at the beginning, wasn't there, that went up on Instagram, which was COVID is God's way of sending us all to our room to think about what we've done. You know, and I think it has literally sent us all to our rooms to think about what we've done. And I do think that I'm a great believer, maybe it's because I'm Scottish, you know, you're Scottish, we grow up Protestant work ethic. I mean, I'm nearly 70 now, and I certainly was brought up that an easy life was not a worthwhile life.
Yeah.
So for my parents, it was hard work and overcoming adversity that made the character of a person. And I believe that in adversity, I wouldn't wish adversity in anyone, but without it, we don't grow. And without it, we don't challenge our norms and our beliefs. You know, we carry around all these ridiculous beliefs. They just, like yours, 2 hours to Inverurie when you could have gotten your bike or not gone at all.
Or not gone at all, yeah.
I think that I'm not going to say everything happens for a reason. I happen to have a quite solid Christian belief, but that's almost not the point. The point is that it has happened, and therefore, hopefully, we can use it to contemplate how we can do things better.
I think one of the other things I wanted to just touch on a little, Avril, and it's a point that I know Tom McCallum's a big advocate of, is we've talked a little bit about working remotely and working from home, but actually it's the concept of working from anywhere. Yeah. And I was thinking about this with yourself in particular before we had the call today, because in the short time we've known each other, you've spent time in London, you've spent time in Cheshire, you've spent time out in Spain, and actually in all of those places you've been able to do all the things you need to do. Yeah, nothing changed from a work point of view. No, absolutely not. And I used to travel a lot. You know, I used to go to Vancouver, I used to go to Moscow, I used to go to, you know, all over the place. And work from wherever I was. And that's why I said perhaps at the beginning that in lockdown 1, the only thing that changed for me really was that I actually decamped to my daughters. I spent 12 just wonderful weeks with Frances. It was the
biggest blessing to spend that length of time with your adult daughter and get to know each other properly as adults. It was lovely. And I actually had a bit more time to think and a bit more time to do things, because I couldn't go out, because I distract myself by going and having coffee with people and having dinner with people and having a drink with people. I'm a people person. So when the people were dragged away from me in physical sense, I spent more time. I was very, very productive in that 12 weeks, but it's got nothing to do with where we are. Nothing to do with where we are. I mean, obviously, if you're a welder, you're stuffed. You have to turn up and weld. And there are many, and if you're a farrier, you have to go where the horses are. But there are people who do have to turn up, physically turn up and do a job. But the vast majority of what we do now is using our heads, not our hands. Obviously, that's talking about a specific segment of society. Which is very fortunate, because there are, everyone who serves us, all the people who became hugely important during this period, all the people who work in the shop, they can't choose to do that. But if you can choose to do it, then do. And hopefully a lot of the people... No, I was going to say that hopefully a lot of the people who currently, are working in cafes and restaurants, many of them are working their way through to something else. They're not going to be there forever. So, yeah.
One of the things we've noticed over the summer, over the last 6 or 7 months, and maybe it's just the type of people that we work with at Ashton McGill, but it's a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of new business models created. And I mentioned Steve Bonthorne a moment or two ago. Steve asked the question in the chat, and Steve's a personal trainer. Steve and I went to school together in Perth, just down the road here, many moons ago. And Steve was one of the first to shift his business online. And as a personal trainer, historically, that's always meant you either, Steve was my running coach when I was running for the past few years. And so I would go meet Steve at his studio. We'd do some work there. He'd make me do really uncomfortable stretches and lunges and whatnot. Then we'd go out for a run. And of course, lockdown meant you couldn't do that. But Steve was able to rethink what he did and how he did it and transition that into an online service delivery, which now means previously his market was Perth and Dundee, Tayside, maybe a wee bit into Fife. Now his market is anywhere.
Yeah, and it has made things previously thought of as a second best option now a perfectly acceptable equal option. Similarly, coaching and mentoring and teaching and training, all of those things which were, obviously it would be better face to face, but you can have it online. Now more and more people are thinking, well, it's just as good as, and I've not had to travel to get to them. And so I think the innovation has been extraordinary. I've seen some just extraordinary innovation across all the businesses, and not just innovation in finding new ways of doing things, but being forced into recognizing where the things you were doing weren't serving you well, or you hadn't been paying enough attention. Because there's nothing like a little bit of adversity to throw where it's sloppy. If it's sloppy, you'll see it extremely quickly when things get tight. So, yeah.
Avril, I'm thinking now about how we move forward from here. So we're in November? It's the 10th of November, as you say, Remembrance Day tomorrow. We've been in this lockdown situation for 7 or 8 months and potentially for another 4, 5, 6 months. What does the future look like? What if we're to pick up any lessons and think about how to, and we've touched on some of them already, but how society could be better, how businesses could do things better, what would be some thoughts that you would want to share around that?
I think what we have to do between now and whenever this eases, and of course it won't change overnight, there will be a probably stop-start gradual transition out over goodness knows how long. I think one of the things is to refuse to be dragged back into whatever the norm was before without very consciously deciding whether that's a good thing to do. Because although we've all treated this, this is the new norm, it's actually not the norm yet. We've been doing it the other way for years and years and years and years and generations. And it will be very, very easy to get flicked back into it. Particularly, I mean, I do know I don't personally work with them, but I do know of 2 businesses which are just gagging to be able to say to people, get your arse back in this office at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. I know, and I think people are going to have to be mindful that you may have to push back on that quite strongly. And that argument has been lost now. But I also think that people in this extra time, for those of us who have extra time, and for some of us who have less time, when you've got children and everything else at home, but for those of us who have extra time, try and use a little bit of it fruitfully to notice the things that could be done better, and to notice the things that you could be doing better, and to see the things that you think, well, I wonder why they do it that way. That's not very effective. All the things I've ever changed in my life and all the innovative things I've been able to help businesses with are when I went into an industry I didn't know, and I was forced to look at something and think and ask the dumb question, why do you do that? So just keep asking why, I think, because I think there's just a huge upsurge of creativity to come through this if we keep asking the whys. Because when comfort zones are those things that where you break out of it a tiny bit. I used to draw a circle and then put a pimple on the top of the circle and explain to people that when you break out of your comfort zone in a tiny little way, without you even knowing it, the rest of you grows out to expand as well. That's why we grow. But the same thing happens with innovation and creativity. The more you break out of just doing it because we've always done it that way, the more you start to see other things. They don't become apparent immediately, but they do over time, because it's a shift in thinking. So I would say use that, because I think people are going to become much more innovative, and they're going to be more articulate about being innovative.
I do wonder, and I agree 100%. I agree 100% with you there. I do wonder whether we need to go right back with some of this to education. And one of the areas that really is suffering just now is the arts. Yeah. And those ridiculous adverts last month with the ballet dancer who's going to retrain as a cyber techno or whatever. I do a lot of work. I still do a lot of work around the area of creativity and design. I'm running a design thinking workshop on Thursday, and one of the slides I always use at the start to really jolt people is that at the age of 5, 98% of children have the capacity to think divergently. They're naturally creative. Mm-hmm. They will just ask. It's how they make sense of the world. They ask questions. They're curious. Yeah. But by the time we get to 20 years old, Avril, that same percentage, it's 2%. 2% of the population by the age of 20 still have the capacity to think divergently. And it's because Sir Ken Robinson talked about this beautifully in his TED Talks.
How schools kill creativity. I could not agree more. I used to teach maths and physics. I left teaching because I couldn't stand the way it was taught. Could not stand it. I couldn't stand the way schools operated. And my absolutely firm belief is that we have to go back and rethink education entirely. I think there's some wonderful, wonderful young teachers around. I've seen a few really wonderful young teachers around. But we take all that, as you said, we take all that bursting creativity and energy and bizarre, random, divergent thinking, and then we try and tamp it down into something. And we have to stop doing it. And there are lots of people like me. I'm nearly 70 now. I am desperate to see all this random energy flowing out there and do something with it. I don't know who it is that thinks. I think the policymakers in education and stats in education and reporting in education and flipping quangos in education. Dear Lord, how has this country gone from having one of the best education systems in the world to what we have now? And yet through that, and this is what I think is wonderful, through that, we're still seeing flashes of innovation coming up, because sometimes you just can't keep it down. And we need to take the lid off.
I think that's a real, if we can take anything out of this whole period, these 7 or 8 months, is that need for change across all aspects of our lives: work, society, education, our children, and give them a better future. The climate, thank goodness that Biden won, or appears to have won the election. and we can have, you know, the leader of the free world with an ounce of empathy and compassion again. If nothing else, that is a positive.
Sure.
I'm conscious of our time, and we've covered a lot of ground. And what I'd probably like to do for the last 5-10 minutes or so, Avril, is just open up to questions. So if anyone has a question, I know some people have been dropping comments, and we've covered a couple of questions to the chat bar. But folks, please do let us know if you have any questions. Tom's great. Tom's a regular contributor to the chat bar, and is basically agreeing with you, Avril. Talked a bit about growth mindset. No growth without stretching, and it's certainly something. And you know, back in that world of sport we've touched on a couple of times today, then that's how you improve in sport as well, is putting yourself into an uncomfortable position and being prepared to.
I know the way we've always done it this way, the bane of my life. I mean, that analogy with sport. I mean, obviously I have an affiliation to sport. When I'm talking to some of the people I work with, as CEOs in particular, and I actually say on a little clip on my website, don't work with me if you want it to be comfortable. You know, the top athletes don't work with a coach because they want to be told that they're doing fine. You know, they expect to be told, you need to be lighter, you need to be stronger, you need to be faster, you need to work harder. You know, you either want to be excellent or you just want to be. You know, it's up to you. It's always a choice.
And I think one of the things that scares me a little as we come out of this period is that, like, I think probably everyone on this call would agree with what you've just said, and we're getting lots of +1s and things in the chat bar. But the majority of the population don't think that way, and they've not been educated. Is maybe unfair, but it's back to that education piece. And we see it with children at 5, and then at 20 that's gone, because the whole system is designed to stop them asking questions and have them be the person to whom questions are asked. And I think if in the long term we really want to change the world, then we could do worse than really home in on that education piece.
Well, we're not going to change the world overnight, that's for sure. It's going to take, 20 years, a full generation. I don't know what an exact generation is. I think it is just about 20 years or so, isn't it? So if we, I mean, I'll be dead by then, but I would like to think that I can do something now, so that in 20 years' time, when I am dead, someone who is just being born now comes through with such freedom of thought and expression, but empathy and the ability to take on board other people's arguments and opinions and points, and for us to have dialectic without debate. You know, what we've got now is that people have lost the ability to exchange strongly differently held opinions and to inform each other and themselves. And that alone is going to kill creativity, because it's applying straitjackets to thinking. And we need to take those off. I'm genuinely, desperately worried that some of what's happening just now is applying straitjackets to thinking, because it's not appropriate to think this or challenge that. You know, if you're not harming someone, and if you're not being rude about someone, you're allowed to have an opinion, and you must be able to express it and have it challenged. And that, I think, is a real problem that we're building into society, and it will have catastrophic effects, because what remains unsaid starts to be done. I think.
So really, you may or may not know this young woman, but there's a friend of mine by the name of Lauren Curry. And if you haven't met Lauren, I'd love to introduce you to her. Lauren's a designer. She's an OBE. She's 31, 32 years old or so now, but she was one of the, I think it was Vogue magazine's top 30 under 30, women that will change the world. And Lauren is on a mission to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And actually, she's somebody that I might think about as a future guest for us on this. But I'd love to introduce you to Lauren, and I'll make a point of doing that beyond today. She just moved to Stockholm from London, actually, for lots of reasons. But yeah, I think so. It's probably looking that way at the moment. And I think Lauren's view of the world is that if we complain about things once, that's okay. Twice, by the time you're complaining about something, by the third time, you have a responsibility to do something about it, to change it.
I could not agree more. Could not agree more. And also only complain to someone who can do something about it. Because the number of people who spend their lives just bleating, you know, if they can't do something about it, just zip, deal with it yourself. I know I'm very old school about that we do personal responsibility is my running theme. In case you haven't noticed. Yeah.
Steve's Steve's comment in the chat bar. The biggest problem, I think, is the talk of returning to normal, and I would agree with that. This going back to normal. How we did things before COVID was unsustainable, and now we have the opportunity to reshape the future to create that new normal. And I think that's, you know, well, that's come across loud and clear in this conversation. That's your view, and certainly mine as well, and ours at Ashton McGill, and you know why we want to create events like this and encourage these kind of conversations, Avril.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we must be resistant, you know, as this changes and eases, not to be sleepwalked back into something that was just habit, you know. Really important not to let that happen to us and not to have that imposed upon us.
I think that's a great point for us to finish on. I'm mindful of everybody's time. Thank you so much to everybody that has joined us today. Avril, a huge thank you to you. I know you just landed back in, back in from Spain, but really appreciate you taking time to join us at lunchtime today. It's been insightful as ever.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me spout. I've always got an opinion on something. Lovely. To everyone listening, I hope it was useful, and I hope to hear from all of you at some point in another one of these, but I'll listen to everybody else speaking.
Grand. Thanks, Avril, and thanks, everyone. I will bring this to a close, and you will be able to watch again on YouTube in the not too distant future. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.